Thank you so much. Just to clarify, the book is not really my book. I'm not the main author. I wrote the introduction, and I edited it. My name doesn't really show up till the very end where it says about the editor. But it is a good book, and better than anything I could have written myself. And so this is what the book looks like, by the way. My talk tonight will come from this book primarily, from here. I want to mention, though, the title that was posted online is a title I gave, Millionaire, Missionary, The Life of William Borden. We are working actually on a biography, a newer biography written a little easier to read than the original here that'll come out sometime this year through this publisher, Aneko Press. And so look for that later this year, Millionaire, Missionary. That's the title I like. The publisher, I'm not sure if he likes it as much as I do, but you'll hear why in the talk itself, why I think that's a decent title for the book. I want to dive into the story tonight, follow along the story of William Borden, and I'm going to tie back in near the end with my own story and testimony, and it'll make sense when we get to that point. So follow along with William Borden. Has anybody here ever read this book before? Adults or young people? Anybody? Anybody familiar with the story of William Borden? One guy here, one or two here. William Borden at one point I just read this the other day in was it Christianity Today? Some article that was posted, they actually said at one time William Borden was the most well-known American missionary in the world in the early 1900s. His story was very, very well-known. It's become less so, but I think it's worth telling once again. So let's dive into the story. In 1887, William Borden was born to millionaire parents. His parents were millionaires. A lot of people who have heard of Borden assume that Borden was connected to the Borden Milk Company, condensed milk back in the day. That's actually online, different places people say it and publish it. It's not true. His dad was actually in real estate and mining. But they were in Chicago. He was a member of Moody Church with his parents there in Chicago back in that time period. At the age of 16, when he graduated high school, he was given a graduation present. And the graduation present was a chaperoned trip around the world. That was his high school graduation gift from his parents. Sounds pretty nice, eh? You know, your own. And his chaperone, in my mind, when I first read the story, I'm thinking of like this older gentleman, maybe in his 50s, you know, kind of like you see in a movie. The chaperone was barely older than him. He was in his 20s, young man by the name of Mr. Erdman. And spanning 1904 and 1905, basically a gap year. You know, instead of a school year that year, he did a gap year, went around the world. They set sail from San Francisco, and they spent significant time in the following countries: Japan, China, Hong Kong. This is the order as well they went. Japan, China, Hong Kong, Singapore, Malaysia, India, Egypt, Palestine, modern-day Israel, Greece, Italy, France, Switzerland, England, and then back to America. About a month into the journey, Borden wrote the following in a letter to his mother. He said, "I have never thought very seriously about being a missionary until lately. I met such pleasant people on the steamer, young people on the steamer who were going out as missionaries, and meeting them influenced me. While talking with them, I learned of the work and the opportunity so that I realized things as I never did before. When I look ahead a few years, it seems as the only thing to do is to prepare for the foreign field." Just a month into his journey, 16 years old, he starts feeling this tug to missions. Missionaries were their hosts in many of the countries they went to, and he spent much of his time learning and interacting with them in their various fields of service. In another letter home to his mom, he said, "You can learn more from a missionary in half an hour than you can pick up yourself in months and months of travel." The missionaries he saw as a resource to learn and understand the cultures, the pagan cultures he was interacting with as a young man for the first time. Speaking of the pagan cultures, Mr. Erdman, his host, his chaperone, wrote the following about the idolatry he witnessed in Kyoto, Japan. He said, "It was a city wholly given to idolatry. With its countless temples, it is in the deadening grasp of false religions and degrading cults." Borden describes a lot about Japan in the book, but he also describes a lot about China. He did visit China. He got sick in China. His China time was actually cut short. He was sick when he was there. He recovered at a hospital in Hong Kong. But he wrote this about China in a letter to his father. He says this, There are some 350,000 boat people in Canton, modern-day Guangdong in southern China. They live in small sampans which line the riverbanks about 10 deep. A boat perhaps 20 feet long will hold a family of 6 or 7. Some of the kids and women have empty cans tied to their backs to act as life preservers if they should fall overboard. For one Chinaman will seldom rescue another because the rescuer has to keep the rescued for the rest of his life if he happens to want to be kept. And sometimes they will bargain with the drowning man before pulling him out. These people live and die on their boats and are not allowed on shore by the land people. That whole reality just shocked Borden to see this reality. 20-foot-long boats living your entire life in that situation, and hundreds of thousands of people. By the way, that his observation that they won't save somebody who's drowning or dying, that's actually a cultural thing that you still see sometimes in China to this day. I saw it myself one day about, 17 years ago, 2006. We were driving from a mountain area south of where we lived back north. Came around a corner. My parents were in the car with me. They were visiting. Saw where a motorcycle accident had happened. And 2 motorcycles with 2 passengers each had somehow wrecked, and the 4 people went flying off the road into like the wall of a home or something, like a local adobe home. And they were just lying there dying on the side of the road. And there was a crowd around them, but everyone was just staring, just a circle. It's all around just watching. Nobody wanted to do anything. Take them to the hospital, try to do something. Nobody wanted to do anything. So I didn't know what to do. I'm not a nurse. I'm not trained in anything like that. But the only thing I knew how to do is get to somebody who I could send back to help. So I sped quickly to the nearest hospital about 30 minutes away and said, there's people dying on the side of the road. Send an ambulance. Do what you can do. And that's the only, there's not even 911 really you can call. Actually, I think I did try to call while we were driving, but it's not reliable, let's put it that way, in China. So I saw that firsthand, and we've heard that living in China over the years. So these kinds of things he saw on his trip shocked him. But in India, they saw even more shocking things. This is how he describes India. The worship of Shiva is the foulest thing imaginable. All the large temples we have seen and innumerable small shrines are dedicated to the worship of Shiva. You probably, he's talking to his mother, you probably know something about this already, but if you don't, I cannot tell you, as it is too awful. I think he's referring there to some of the sexual things that happen in relation to worship of Shiva there, and he doesn't even want to write them down because they're too horrible to describe. The fact that this vile teaching, he says, is the most universal and popular thing in Hinduism is enough to offset everything that Hinduism may have done for the people, if it has done anything but degrade them. It makes me tired to have a person who knows little or nothing about it say that these people are as well off with their religion as we are with ours, or rather that theirs is as good as ours. 5 minutes of explanation of facts in any one of a dozen temples I have visited would disillusion such thoughts, such a person and their thoughts. In a city called Benares, the 2 of them took a boat and went downstream for some distance, seeing people of all classes at their religious duties. Several corpses were in the process of cremation. They're at the Ganges River, basically. The bodies are placed on piles of wood right in the open, and the ashes are thrown into the Ganges with people bathing just 50 feet off. The bodies are placed in certain positions according to the creed of the deceased, some with head pointing east, others west, etc. All day long throughout the year, the smoke of 1 or more pyres rises from this place. Holy men and priests die, if possible, looking out over the river. As we passed down, we saw an old man, a living skeleton, seated on the bottom step near the water with a friend propping him up. When we came back, minutes later, hours later, he didn't say he was dead. He was one of the holy men. Writing again to his mother, his praying mother, not long after his India visit, Borden says, I hope you won't mind hearing about these things, but they are actual everyday occurrences, and I couldn't well help seeing them. And then he continues, I pray that God would take my life into his hands and use it for the furtherance of his kingdom as he sees best. I feel sure that he will answer my prayer. It strengthens me to know that you also are praying for this. I have so much of everything in this life, and there are so many millions who have nothing and live in darkness. I don't think it is possible to realize it until one sees the East, the eastern part of the world. I know it is no easy thing to serve the Lord but others have been enabled to do so, and there is no reason why I should not be a missionary. Again, he's only 2 or 3 months into his journey, and the conviction and the calling increases every step along the way. After finishing the journey, I'm going to skip, again, the book has some details about the Middle East and then Europe as well. He had a real religious experience in England at a conference where he really rededicated his life to the Lord, even at the end of his year there. But at the end of the year, he finishes and then starts college at Yale in 1905. I guess by that point he was still 17, going on 18. He starts college at Yale. I'm not sure if he got in because of his grades or because of the money they had. Either way, he was accepted and started at Yale. And he was a good student. Sometime during his freshman year at Yale, I'm not going to look at all the details here. I want to focus on the mission call. During his freshman year, I think it was in January, February, they took a trip to Nashville to a missions conference. And in Nashville, he heard about the gospel need among the millions of Muslims in the world. Dr. Samuel Zwemer. Anybody here ever heard of Samuel Zwemer? Anybody? Again, he was known 100 years ago as the foremost authority on Islam in the entire world. He was called the Apostle to Islam, a Christian minister and seminary president, and Dr. Samuel Zwemer. And he spoke at this conference. And he's described like this. Zwemer was the man with a map. He always traveled with a big, huge map of the world, charged with enthusiasm, grim with earnestness, filled with a passion of love for Christ and the perishing. He made that great map come alive, voicing the silent appeal of the Muslim world. Hundreds of millions under the sway of Islam. Nowadays, we'd say billions. What a challenge to the Christian church. Never before had there been such open doors to evangelize the Muslim world. The hour is ripe was the burden of Zwemer's message. The Muslim world. Ironically, the Muslim world today is more closed than it was then. Back then, there were more open doors. What I'm going to describe in a minute about Borden's time in Cairo doesn't sound like, you wouldn't think that'd be possible today, what he did 100 and something years ago in Cairo. His calling continued to increase, but after that conference, he had a specific calling. During that conference, at some point, Samuel Zwemer had mentioned China. And not just China, but the Muslims of China, the Muslims of Western China. And if some of you might have heard this, there's actually 2 groups of Muslims in China. One has been in the news recently, the Uyghur people. The Uyghurs have been persecuted by the Chinese. They've been locked up. They've been put in camps and a lot of bad things. That's far West China. Borden was burdened for a group called the Hui, H-U-I, the Hui Muslims of West Central China, not far West China, Western China, but not all the way out. And they're Chinese Muslims. They look Chinese, they speak Chinese, but they've been Muslims for dozens of generations back. Those Muslims are the ones Borden felt called to, and they lived in a province called Gansu province. Borden never wavered from that calling all through his years at Yale and the Seminary at Princeton. He continued with the calling to the Gansu Muslims of China. But his call to that field didn't excuse him. He didn't feel excused from being faithful and serving in his homeland, in his own university. He actually left a legacy at Yale that is probably unprecedented. The book is called, the original book, published in 1923, called Borden of Yale. He's known for his years at Yale because of what he experienced and did while at Yale. I'm going to talk about just briefly, the book goes more in depth about that time. What happened was the Lord brought a sort of a revival to Yale through his passion for prayer and his passion for evangelism there on the campus as a student. A prayer meeting that began with a handful of friends in the morning ended up spreading through the entire university. One of the original members of the group, not Borden, but another man, wrote this. Borden and I began to pray together in the morning before breakfast. We had been meeting only a short time when a third joined us, and soon after a fourth. The time was spent in prayer after a brief reading of Scripture. Our object was to pray for the religious work of the class and college, and also for those of our friends who we were seeking to bring to Christ. So it started simple enough, but spread. The pre-breakfast meetings spread. By the end of his sophomore year, there were many groups in each of the classes, and it was not passed down from the seniors to the juniors, but came up from the freshmen. Started with Borden as a freshman and spread up to the seniors. That was his impact there. Another friend wrote of him how easy Borden was to pray with. He could be jolly with the rest, and when the crowd was gone, it would be just as natural for him to say, "Come, brother, let's pray together." He was the easiest man to pray with I have ever known. But he didn't just pray. Him and his friends there, they actively shared the gospel with their classmates. Borden, here called Bill by his friends, William Borden, Bill Borden, was always picking out the toughest proposition and going through thick and thin. Don't you love the old way we used to talk 100 years ago? Going through thick and thin to win him for Christ. He wasn't scared of anybody. Borden, by the way, actually tried out for the Yale University football team. He was a pretty big guy, tough guy, not real tall, but real strong, they said. He was a wrestler as well. He tried out for the football team, almost made the team. His mom was praying that he wouldn't make the team, is what he says in his book, in his letters. But he was trying to make the team. And Yale, by the way, if you look it up, Yale, those years that he was there, was winning the national championship almost every year. They were a good team. They were like the best in the country, and he almost made the team while he was there. I was looking for a picture of him on the team, but he would have made it. We would have seen, there'd be a picture of him there with his uniform and everything on. Borden, I need to mention this. Borden lost his father as a sophomore in college. Sophomore at Yale, just 18 or 19 years old. His father dies. And that's sad in and of itself. Your dad dies at that age. But in his circumstance, that made him the heir to what would be worth in today's money, hundreds of millions of dollars. At the age, as an adult, at the age of 18, 19, he's now the heir, together with his mom or whoever was that was there. And he began to take responsibility for the family, the leadership of the family finances and their businesses that they ran. He began to be involved in those things at that age, 19 years old, as a sophomore at Yale. What would you have done in his shoes? What would you have done with that kind of money just plopping down into your lap? What Borden did was this. He was burdened for the outcast and the drunks and the poor people in his city. He used some of that money to start what's called the Yale Hope Mission in the most unlikable, nasty part of New Haven, Connecticut, where they live. And he founded it. They found the place, but he wasn't just throwing money at it. He actually was on the ground in the trenches, pulling people out of the trenches, sharing the gospel with them, preaching to them, helping them, and trying to help reach people for Christ. And one visitor at the time, when he was asked what impressed him most about his visit to that area, is said to have replied, "The sight of that young millionaire kneeling with his arm around a bum in the Yale Hope Mission." So he had all this money, had all this potential, but he liked to be in the trenches, sharing the gospel with the people, serving as best he could in that way. He graduated from Yale. Again, there's a lot more to the story if you read through the book. And he started at Seminary at Princeton, Yale and Princeton. Now, they weren't as liberal then as they are now, but they were already starting to trend that way even then. Borden mentions, during his time at Yale, he mentions numerous times how he despised certain speakers that would come and speak and preach. And I say despise, that's not the right word. He would kind of mock them in his letters to his mother. You wouldn't believe who said so-and-so and this crazy, why would they have these guys even come? Not worth listening to at all. He'd say stuff like that about the speakers that would come. There'd be good ones too mixed in, and there'd be bad ones. And the same thing continued while he was at Princeton. Here's a letter. It's an extended letter that he wrote to another friend. It's dated January 29th, 1910. And he shared the following concerns about the academic world he was in at the time. Let me read this extended quote here. "The spirit that prevails is this: the general agnostic atmosphere pervading everything and deadening all convictions, those as to sin and truth included. In line with this, a broad spirit of tolerance is insisted upon, especially in matters of religion, and any and all are branded as narrow-minded who dare think otherwise. That word narrow is one of Satan's deadliest weapons, it seems to me, for most people would apparently rather be shot than be called narrow. Thus it is even as Christ predicted, the broad way to destruction is thronged, but few are climbing the narrow way that leads to life. When we come to distinctively Christian and religious matters, the situation is even worse. Practically everyone," end quote, "believes that the Bible is full of contradictions and errors, etc. Even earnest Christians seem to feel that it doesn't matter. The New Testament fares little better than the Old at the hands of critics, and the supernatural is expunged from both. And against all this, scarcely a voice of any authority is raised in protest from within the ranks. The leaders, I feel, either do not clearly see the issues, or if they do, they seek to compromise. This is evident from the kind of speakers that are approved of, and still more so from the Bible teachers and teachings that are popular. Dr. Zwemer, Borden's still talking here, Dr. Zwemer, his mentor, sees all these things clearly and has helped a lot. Actually, Dr. Zwemer was the president for a short period of time, an interim president there. And he's seen these things clearly. He has helped a lot, but now he is going back to the Middle East. And as far as I know, there is no one with a theological training who can take his place and help to keep the student movement pure, strong, and evangelical. The need is tremendous and the opportunity immense. I should like nothing better than to get into the fight right here in the American colleges should the Lord close my way to the foreign field. This letter was actually written to this young man, inviting him to come and fight in America from wherever he was, because Borden knew that his calling was overseas, and I'd like to fight here. I'd love to be able to fight this battle for the faith, for the gospel here, but I'm called to the foreign field. While in seminary, during those years, he was studying Arabic besides his seminary studies. He was learning Arabic because he's going to work with Muslims someday. He was also teaching Sunday school at a little mission church down the street. And again, besides his studies, and he was also donating. He started giving to causes. He actually sat on the board of numerous ministries by that point in his life already. And it was estimated that during those seminary years, he donated nearly $20 million of our money today to various gospel causes. $20 million. $70,000 in their money. If you go online and kind of translate that to the money today, $20 million. But that's only what they knew about. His friend, Charlie Campbell, said his best friends never even knew a small percentage of the gifts he was making. His checkbooks show how little he spent for himself and how much he was doing for others. The unusual feature of his relationship to all such organizations that he gave to was that he was never satisfied with merely giving financial aid. He always gave time, thought, and counsel. He wanted to be involved in those different things. After he graduated from Yale in 1909 and Princeton in 1912, so now he's up to 24, 25 years old, his commitment to the mission field had not wavered, even in the face of intense pressure to take advantage of his education and his wealth back home instead of wasting it in China. One friend actually said to him and expressed surprise and said, "Why are you throwing yourself away as a missionary?" That was his friend's comment to him. Borden's reply to that particular friend was this: "You, my friend, have not seen heathenism. You haven't been to China and Japan and India like I have. You haven't seen what I've seen. If you'd seen what I've seen, you wouldn't say what you just said." That was his response to his friend. In the newspapers, again, this is a famous dude. He was famous for the money and the family and the wealth. This was posted in the newspaper as he was preparing to go to the field. Young millionaire renounces world to be a missionary. I like this one even better here. This one is, what would you do if you were a young man in the bloom of life, handsome, of robust physique, cultured, possessed of $5 million, again, in that day's money, and unmarried? What would you do? That's the question in the newspaper. Well, what he did was left it all. Didn't leave it all. He still had the money, but he left the possibilities behind to go to the mission field. But before he left, he went on a college tour. He went around for 3 months speaking at nearly 30 colleges and seminaries, seeking to recruit even more missionaries for the Muslim world and telling everyone about the Gansu mission field he was going to and that he longed to reach. For instance, he would speak, the place he was headed to, this is how he described Gansu province. Gansu, with its bigoted, proud race of Muslims, Arabs by descent. There were also people called the Dongxiang, remnants of the old Hun tribes in the mountains, and another group called the Salar from the distant Turkish people, Turkish speech and faces. Muslim exiles who had tramped across Central Asia to find a home beside the Yellow River. All these Muslims were mingled with Tibetans from the border marches and Mongols from north of the Great Wall. All these people groups and peoples there that needed Jesus. The second thing he mentioned about that area was that the Great Silk Road ran through Gansu 1,000 miles from east to west across the Gobi Desert, linking city after city in which no missionary had ever before labored. One of the most neglected fields in the world. Oh, how it drew him because so few were willing to lay down their lives that they too might have the message of redeeming love. Now, during his talks, he would describe the field and then he would talk to the students. Now, I'm here tonight with a bunch of students, really the same age group that he would have been speaking to at those 30 colleges and places. So what I want to do for just a minute is, we're talking here about Borden, but I do want to challenge you with the same questions that he challenged people with back then. So he would ask this question, for instance, are you steering or drifting through life? Are you steering or drifting? You just drifting, going with the flow? Are you steering yourself towards a purpose? John Piper has a famous sermon about having a holy ambition for Christ. Google that sermon. It's really, really good. And he asked this question, if 10 men are carrying a log, 9 of them on the little end and 1 on the heavy end, and you want to help, which end will you lift on? 10 over here, 1 over here. Where are you going to come in and help? It's obvious, right? And then he would say this, America at that time had 500 times more Christian workers than China. 500 times more pastors dedicated than China had. 10 to 1 is a lot. 500 to 1 is a lot more even. He would also ask this question to kind of close out his talk. He would say to those who were still scared, uncertain about how they could serve, he would say, are you at least willing for God to make you willing? Are you willing to be made willing? I don't know. I don't know if I can go. I don't think it's me. I really don't want to go. I like it here. It's comfortable here. Whatever your reason might be, are you at least willing to put it on the table and say, Lord, make me willing? That reminds me of John Piper. He says that for years and years and years. He's obviously served well in his capacity, but he would still every year say, Lord, is this the year you want me to go and serve in the Muslim world or in Africa or China, wherever it may be? Is this the year? I'm putting it on the table and I'm going to ask you, should I go or should I stay? Borden set sail for China on December 17th, 1912. He was heading to Egypt first. He needed to study Arabic, finished in preparation for laboring among Muslims in China who spoke Chinese and some Arabic as well. It seems like he sailed alone. He sailed alone. 30 colleges, universities. Maybe there wasn't enough time for somebody else to kind of get ready to go. Maybe. Or maybe just people weren't that interested, but he sailed alone to Cairo. Borden did. I'm sure he would have paid someone's way to go with him if they would have wanted to go, right? Money wasn't the issue. But he sailed alone. He left before Christmas, December 17th. He was at sea on Christmas. That's interesting to me because I'm a missionary. I've served for 20 years. I'm 40 this year. I just turned 40. I've been a missionary since I was 18, 19 years old when I went to China at 18 and 19 to live and learn Chinese. Usually, if we have a choice to leave on December 17th or after Christmas, we'll pick after Christmas. We'll stay home that extra week and just enjoy time with the family. He's like, no, I want to be there New Year's Day in Cairo. That's why he picked that particular ship. I want to be there to start the year there, full bore for Christ. He wasn't content, however, just to study Arabic in Cairo. It would have been easy just to go to language school. I'm just going to study. I got to get to China. But even in Cairo, while he was studying Arabic, he dove into the work, connecting with the local churches, with the local ministries, with the African Nile press there that printed literature. And he was working there. One of the things he actually started during his short time there was to canvass all of Cairo with what they called khutbas, Khutbas, khutbas. They were basically gospel tracts, but printed in an Arabic style. They had a little bit of an Arabic flair to them, and they passed off as Arabic literature, Muslim literature, and they had a good getaway time. They could give these out in the markets and different places and give a bunch out. Everyone's all happy, and by the time someone realized it was the gospel, they were gone, and they couldn't hurt them or cause a riot there in that place. And their goal was to reach all of Cairo with these khutbas at that time. In late March of 1913, so we're talking mid to late March. It was Easter weekend that particular year, so 111 years ago this coming month. Borden was put in the hospital with what was thought to be cerebral meningitis, a relatively common, yet sometimes deadly illness common to much of Africa. Because he was a famous, well-known person, telegrams were sent around the world requesting prayer for his recovery. Friends and colleagues were lifting him up to God all over the world, people who knew him. Borden's mother and younger sister, who were on their way for a visit. They were on a ship. They didn't know he was even sick at all until they reached Gibraltar, which is the gateway to the Mediterranean Sea. Later, when they arrived at the port near Cairo, Dr. Zwemer himself met them and was going to bring them to the hospital in Cairo. And they're on the way there. About halfway into the journey, a message arrived saying that William was not doing well. But Dr. Zwemer told him, don't worry, Borden has been up and down during the last few weeks. Don't worry. But another message soon followed, delivered right to their train car. William Borden had just died, passed away, 4 hours before his mother arrived at his bedside at the American hospital in Cairo. April 13th, I think it was, 1913. William Borden died, 25 years old. 25 years old, yet the lady who wrote the book, Mrs. Howard Taylor, it's Hudson Taylor's daughter-in-law. He had enough material, more than enough, to write a whole biography of his faithfulness, his dedication to the Lord at 25 years old. Hadn't even really been a missionary. 3 months in Cairo, 3.5 months. And he dies there. His mother almost made it to his bedside. Can you imagine traveling across the world by ship and missing it by 4 hours? 4 hours. He just died, whatever. His mother later made a comment in a letter after seeing him across the room that day in the hospital. They wouldn't let her get too close because they thought maybe it was contagious, whatever he had. But she made this comment in a letter. She said, I should never have recognized him. His beard and mustache had grown, and the contour of his face was changed. Now, why do I share that? It stood out to me because I always imagined him dressed, clean-shaven, handsomely dressed, like his pictures we see, like the Borden of Yale pictures. This is his university pictures. That's how I always imagined him. And so then she describes a bearded, mustached face that even his own mother didn't recognize across the room. Now, that's weird. There's no pictures of that available. So there actually is. We used an AI generator to try to get a picture of Borden, what he would have looked like. I say we. Some of you here might know Brent Pinkall. He actually is the one that did it for me. So if you get the book and look at it, you'll see our attempt to make Borden look like what he would have looked like. Because not only did he shave and tried to look like the locals, he actually wore the red fez they used to wear around the head. And he actually convinced at one point some American visitors that he was a local, and they didn't know it was actually William Borden they were talking to or had seen there at the hotel where they were staying. Again, I share this because he really was a missionary. He was going to work with the China Inland Mission in China, who they're the ones who were dressing like the locals and imitating the dress to try to reach the people and get closer to the people. It worked in Cairo for him, and it was going to work for him in China as well. And he almost fooled his own mother. Can you imagine? No, that's not him. Oh wait, that is my son. But he doesn't look the same. He was adjusting everything to be able to reach out to those people. Now his death shocked the entire world. It really did. It was worldwide news at the time. Christians, non-Christians alike. It was incomprehensible to so many people. He was slandered by the more leftist media of his day. What a waste. What an idiot. Wasting his life. Even the Christians, though, were tempted to say, well, what is God doing in these things, Obviously, we can look now and see that God did many things through him. I mentioned earlier that no missionary sailed with him. But it's well documented that many missionaries were raised up after his death. They said, I'm going to take his place. I'm going to go and serve in his place. Some of you might have heard the phrases I'm going to say here: no reserve, no retreat, no regrets. Have you ever heard that anthem or those phrases stated in any meeting somewhere? A couple of you? I'm surprised there's not more of you that have heard that. I've heard it many times in different talks. People take those talks and they attribute those words to William Borden. They say they're his words, and the story goes as he wrote no reserve in his Bible when he was a young man in college and he had all this money. No reserve. I'm not keeping anything for myself. It's all for God. No retreat when he's about to leave for the mission field and people are trying to tell him to stay. No, I got to go. No retreat and no regrets. He's at his deathbed in Cairo. He's sick and he scribbles in his Bible, no regrets. I did everything. I served faithfully. That's how the story is told many places. And when I say told, I'm talking about Billy Graham, John MacArthur, Tim Keller, they all have told this publicly in sermons and places. It's a myth. It actually is not true. It's not in the book. It's not recorded anywhere, but it's been repeated so many times. People repeat it over and over. You can Google it and see for yourself. What the real story is, though, I think is even more powerful. He didn't say those words. William Borden did not say those words. They were actually written about him by Mrs. Taylor, his biographer. No reserve, no retreat, no regrets had any place in Borden's consecration to God. Which is more powerful, to say that about yourself, or for somebody to study your life, all your letters, all your testimonies, what everyone else said about you, and then to say that about you for the whole world to see? What's more powerful? Powerful. He was really, truly dedicated to the Lord wholeheartedly. But he dies there. So to kind of bring this full circle, he donated a ton of money. When he died, he had his will made out. He knew he was going to a field where he might not live. He knew that was a possibility where he was going. He donated millions and millions of dollars to different places. One of the ministries that received a $250,000 at that time, again, would have been millions today, was the China Inland Mission. And they took a portion of that money and they opened the Borden Memorial Hospital in Gansu province, the place that he was trying to reach and never made it. They opened the hospital in 1985 years after his death. The hospital opened. It was called the Gospel Hospital locally, and it specialized in infectious diseases, especially leprosy. The hospital continued serving for many years, but in 1949, communism took over in China, and the missionaries were forced to leave, but the hospital actually remained open. It's actually still open to this day, although now it's run by the local city. And there's actually a small museum there dedicated to William Borden to this day in the state communist hospital in that city, Lanzhou, Gansu province. There's even a small house church that meets on the campus of the hospital to this day. How do I know those details? Because I've been there many, many times. As a matter of fact, I've lived there in that city for many years. Let me tie this back into my own testimony. I visited Gansu for the first time 21 years ago in May, the spring of 2003. I was still 19 years old at the time. I crisscrossed that region with another team I was with. We were praying, we were learning Chinese, and we were sharing the gospel with people. One particular summer night, June I think it was, I walked the streets of the Muslim city of Linsha. This is the same city that Borden was trying to go to, not just the province, but all the way down to the same city there. I was in that city, and I remember walking home that night after I'd shared the gospel with a teacher I met, and I remember thinking to myself, I like this place. I think I could live here. And I had no plans to live there, but I thought, like, this would be a place I'd like to be. Well, and by the way, I'd never heard of Borden by that. I wasn't going there because of Borden. I had never heard of the guy. I was like you guys right here. Like, I don't know who this guy is. Never heard of him. I don't have time to share the whole story, but 2 years after that, by early 2005, I'd gotten married in the meantime. My wife, who's from Peru, and the two of us, we were living there in that city less than 2 years later through a series of circumstances. That's where the Lord placed us in 2005, that city. So we're talking now about 100 years after Borden dies. Here we are living in the city he was trying to reach, still not knowing anything about his story. No idea whatsoever. Two of our children, we have three. The older two were born in that province. My son was born in that very city. He's 18 today. He's a senior at Logos Online. He'll be graduating here in Moscow in June. He was born there in that city. Gabriel is his name. My daughter, Ariel, was born in the capital city where the hospital is located. She was born there in 2007. So that's all. I mean, we lived there for many years. We lived in that region for nearly 15 years, up until 2018, which our brother mentioned earlier. 2018, I was deported from China. After 5 years, 2013 to 18, we really took an aggressive approach to sharing the gospel, to sharing God's word, Bibles and tracts and stuff with hundreds of thousands of homes all out that region. It was a risky thing that we were doing, and finally they did catch up with me there, and I was deported in 2018 from China. What we did during those years was very similar to what Borden was doing in Cairo. Again, I still didn't know the guy's story. By that time I'd heard his name, but I'd never read the book. I never had read his story until much later. But I was deported from China, so I can't go back. I tried last year again, 5 years later, still can't get back in. So I'm stuck outside of China, at least for the time being. My wife and kids can go visit, but as a family, we can't go back and live there. So that's a coincidence or a providence, if you will, connecting me to William Borden. But one other connection that I just found out, and the only person here that knows is our brother in the back. I just mentioned to him before the service. A month ago today, February 7th, literally a month ago today, my dad, I was sitting in Peru at my little desk there, sweating. It's hot in Peru right now. It's summertime there. It's warm. And I was sitting there. My dad messages me, and he says, "Hey, you're not going to believe this, son." He was just reading through this book for the first time. "You're not going to believe this, but we're related to William Borden," he says. And I said, "You're right. Tell me more." And he said, "I don't have time right now." I said, "What do you mean you don't have time right now? You tell me, explain to me how we're related to William Borden." And I'm thinking, who knows what this is going to be, right? Some weird thing. But it is true. It is quite far back. But to make it short, Borden and I share the same great grandfather. 10 generations back for me, 6 generations back for him. So same Richard Borden was the guy's name. Richard Borden had 2 sons, Ben Borden, with whom I'm not named after, but Ben Borden and John Borden. John Borden is William Borden's line, and Ben Borden is the line that eventually leads to my family. So we actually are distant cousins, which is just really cool and really weird. Like, I don't know what that means, but I joke around when I get to heaven and see Borden. I'll say, "What's up, cuz?" And he'll say, "What?" You won't even understand what I'm saying because of the slang, but I'll explain to him how we're related in more ways than one, not just relationally, but ministerially. What is sad, though, and one of the reasons why I still want to push his story so hard, is that the region he was trying to reach and the region I served in all those years, it's still very, very unreached. There are some Christians, very few. It's not much changed from what it was 100 years ago. And that grieves me. It would grieve him as well. And so one reason I want to share his story is to challenge all of us to, at the very minimum, pray for Gansu, pray for that area, pray for China. And hopefully others will be called by reading his story to go to that place. I can't go to China right now, but almost everyone here, if you wanted to, could get a visa, buy a ticket, and go visit that part of China. And you could share the gospel with students who speak English. You don't even have to learn Chinese. You could go share with English-speaking students in China, and nothing would stop you. You could do that this summer if you wanted to. So I'm just saying that. It's not something that's like out there, like some mystery that you can't ever do. You could do it if you want. And so I do want to challenge you guys to consider missions, to consider serving. And Gansu is still in my heart. If I can't get back in, at the very minimum, I'm going to send people back in. We've got teams that we still send in every year from different parts of the country. So if you want to be in contact with me, please do. You can do that through our different things. I'll mention these in just a minute. I do want to finish out my notes here and not forget anything. I do want to bring this talk to a close by issuing one final plea with you. I've kind of already done it, but I got ahead of myself here. Remember what Borden said to his skeptical friend who was indifferent to the need? Well, what did he say? "You have not seen heathenism." That's what he said. So I want to echo that remark, but I want to adapt it just a little bit. If you're still indifferent to missions, you haven't seen the millions of Chinese Muslims perishing still with zero gospel witness. You haven't seen the multitudes of Tibetan Buddhists who are deceived by a demonic religion and are inaccessible. They actually really are inaccessible. You can't get to them. The government has them cordoned off from the outside world. You can't get there still to this day. And you haven't seen the hundreds of millions of Chinese men and women trapped in materialistic communism with no God but the state. In conclusion, may we never forget the life of William Borden, whose testimony still speaks to us from the grave, and may we continue to boldly and sacrificially target the unreached peoples of the world with the gospel. No reserve, no retreat, no regrets. So that's the talk there. Thank you. I want to mention something, though, specifically. Besides the book here, and we actually think of some, if you have any questions, we're going to do a little short Q&A here for a few minutes. So think if you have a question about what I've said or China or anything about that. But while you're thinking of a question, I want to mention what I've got here. So the book is available in the back for sale. At the conference, I'm selling these for $20. If you guys want to give, if you don't have 20 bucks, feel free to give what you got. All the proceeds go to support our mission to China, though. So give more if you want, give less, but feel free to buy these books and take one with you. If you don't have money or don't want to buy books, or if you want an ebook, the publisher actually offers all of his ebooks for free on Kindle. So you can get that book for free on Kindle with the QR code on the bookmark back there. So feel free to do the free way if you want. Also, in the back, there's another bookmark. It says Unbeaten. This is actually my story being deported from China. I just finished this recently. It's available on Kindle. It's not free. It's really cheap, but it's not free. But it's just, you can read about my interrogation, all the different stuff that I went through 6 years ago when I was deported from China. That's also how you can probably, the best way probably to contact me would be through that. Then we have our Pray for China bookmark. So I mentioned China and praying for China. This is prayforchina.us is a website. What we've done is we've matched up every state in the country with every Chinese province so that there's a specific place for you, wherever you're from, to pray for and adopt for prayer. We're not just all praying for, if I asked you to name from memory 10 cities in China, probably nobody here could name 10 cities in China off the top of your head. Maybe 5, maybe 3, right? Beijing, Shanghai, Hong Kong, and then you start running out right there. So the goal is to pray for everywhere in China, all the provinces, all the cities, eventually all the counties. Eventually we're going to match up every county, all 3,000 of our counties with almost 3,000 of their counties, so that everyone's praying for China in every single place in China, and hopefully going there at some point as well. So take one of these and remember to pray for China. And then finally, there's another book that I just finished editing. I didn't write it, edit it. Tears for Tana. Toby Sumter is giving a talk at the conference tomorrow on the life of John Peyton. And I went to the island where John Peyton served last year and did some research, and then just published this book with an extra conclusion and an introduction. On Saturday night, I'll be standing right here at 6 p.m. giving a talk on John Peyton here at like an after conference thing. So feel free to come back Saturday night and hear about what I learned when I went to the island of Tana, where John Peyton served the cannibals there 165 years ago. So that's all the bookmarks. You can take as many of those as you want, or grab the book. If you want to buy the book, there's a box to throw cash in, or there's 3 different QR codes if you use Cash App or Venmo or whatever you use. There's some QR codes there for that. I think that's all the practical stuff I wanted to share.